Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the December National Webcast. I am Roisin Suver with the Multi-State ISAC. We are broadcasting live from Washington, D.C. today. Right now, we have over 500 members on our webinar, so that is a fantastic showing. We also have a live audience here as well, so thank you for being here. We are partnering with Symantec today. Today is the Symantec Government Symposium, and it's a great partnership. It's a great event so far. We've had great speakers this morning and some great different sessions that we've been looking at. The symposium today is titled Smart Cyber, Complex Challenges and Bold Solutions. So that is very appropriate for what we're going to be talking about here today. Today we're going to be talking about smart cities, cybersecurity, and the intersection of IOT. We'll talk about how we're using that technology, the process of integration from a systems of systems approach to how that fits into our IT strategies and our governance. And of course, we're going to speak to the many challenges and concerns that this brings with it. We have a great panel here with us today representing state and local government as well as the private sector. We have Karen Jackson, Commonwealth of Virginia Secretary of Technology, John McCaffrey, the Chief Information Officer of Westchester County with New York. We have Bob O'Connor, the Chief Information Security Officer of Maricopa County, Arizona, and Tom Mcclellan on the end over there, Symantec's Director of Policy and Government Affairs. And I'd also like to congratulate Bob and John for their awards today at the Symantec State and Local Cyber Awards. So congratulations to both of you. So with that, we're going to turn this over to get your ideas, a little bit of an intro, and some of your thoughts on the topic at hand today. So, Janet, or Karen, I'm sorry, we can start with you.
Janet can start.
First of all, thank you all for having us here. Virginia is happy to be a part of this event. I think throughout my career, I've had almost a 20-year career in state government. I think the pace of change that we're seeing right now is incrementally just unbelievably faster than anything we've ever witnessed. Unfortunately, our silos and our procedures and our policy-making process has not kept up. Virginia has laws and rules on the books that have been around since, it seems like, time immemorial. And so trying to get the policy environment, trying to get the technical environment to be something that is ingrained in a new way in government, whether it's on the policy side of the house or the technology side of the house, is requiring us to take some really interesting looks at the way we do business, the way our citizens want us to do business, the way we interact with our localities and our other partners, and really trying to send us into a new nexus on how we're all going to interrelate and interact in the future, because we're all going to be much more connected, and with that comes a lot of challenges that we need to start to address and try to figure out some creative solutions to. So I'm happy to be here and be part of the conversation.
Thanks. John, you want to take that?
So I think in the same way, in the local government, we have things in a more difficult fashion in some ways than say state or federal, but then things more easy because of our size, managing the complexities, managing policies, and adapting to the change is very difficult because we're limited in the resources we have, and not that we're not all limited in the resources we have, but the complexities are much smaller as well. You know, cyber is at the top of our list of what we're tackling, and we're trying to create in Westchester County, New York, we're trying to create a collaborative effort with the municipalities along with the state and other counties to pool the resources that we do have and do we have a very aggressive shared services effort in IT and many functions of the county, but we're also looking at it in terms of cyber to see if we can, at least within the county, which is just short of 1 million people, very diverse, but see if we can create sort of a collaborative effort within the county and all of those resources to pool them to serve better.
And I started out in the private sector, moved to the federal government, now I'm in local government, so one of the things I'm trying to do is understand the similarities and differences between those, how maybe we can do a better job integrating those different communities, and really apply it to the mission of the local government, the county, which is how do we make a safe environment for our people to live.
Great, thanks. And last but not least.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Government Symposium here, and greetings from the nation's capital for those who are online. This is Thomas Mcclellan. I head up government affairs for Symantec. My role is to help educate governors and county officials and others in what we call the SLED market. And I spent the majority of my career, and I know many of you on the line probably know me from my days with the National Governors Association. I spent about 18 years heading up Homeland Security and Public Safety policy for NGA, and I started all the work that NGA continues today on cybersecurity. So I come at this whole discussion about IOT and smart cities really from a policy, from a long perspective. And so when I look at it, I'm not going to get into bits and bytes, but I want to kind of think about some of what the strategic challenges are, what are some of the policy ramifications at the state, the local, and the federal level. And I'd be remiss if I didn't start the conversation as we start talking about interconnected cities. And so I pulled a definition from Karen's website, Secretary Jackson's website in Virginia, that a smart community is a community that engages its citizens and connects its infrastructure electronically. And so when you begin to think about smart cities and IoT, there are a number of, obviously, great benefits, but there are some cautionary tales, and I'll tell two very quickly, and then I can turn it back. First is something that you all may know about called the Mirai Bod. So last year, 2016, we saw one of the biggest DDoS attacks in history, and it was something called the Mirai Bod. And interestingly enough, I'd ask people if people know what Mirai means. Mirai means future in Japanese, and so the Mirai Bod attack crippled components of the web. And it was done through IoT-connected devices, predominantly routers and TVs and DVRs and things like that. And it was tremendous. And so we begin to think about kind of doing more in connections. The estimates are 20 billion connected devices. Gartner's estimate is about 20 billion devices by 2020. And that presents a tremendous upside and a tremendous difficulty. So when you begin to think about kind of, what the challenges, what the benefits are with IoT and smart cities, we also have to begin to think about what framework are these things being built in. And so when you begin to look at the security around IoT devices, there's really not a whole lot of regulation there. And so it's a cautionary tale that as we move forward, that we need to begin to think about what is a framework for advancing security and what should be connected to what and under what circumstances.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, so we'll get started with a couple of questions here, and then we can just kind of go down, and you guys can answer that as we go. So how are, primarily for the first three, I guess, how are state and local governments successfully utilizing IoT technology and devices to deliver secure services to the citizenry?
Well, I'll start. This is Bob from Maricopa. So we are starting out with pilot projects, small projects, because as I mentioned before, the mission of the county is really to provide an environment that's safe, clean for living. So the pilot projects are really starting out with our Department of Transportation, for instance. What are we doing with in-road sensors, with flood control? How can we better understand where there are dangerous water levels and try to anticipate that. So we're also working with our GIS, our geospatial information systems, to use drones, which is another interesting twist. We can talk more about that later.
So I think along the same lines, you look and we talk about IoT, and it really isn't. It isn't new. It's a term that we put around things that have been out there for quite some time, and some of the systems that are out there, water control systems, sewer systems for us. A couple of years back, there was a small dam in Westchester County that had been hacked, and the feds came in and looked at it and determined, I think, that it was a Chinese perpetrator, if you will. But for our sewage control systems, water treatment systems, and then adding additional items ourselves. But our perspective also is it's not always about implementation of our own, it's about gathering the data from the devices that are out there. We have done our own things with regard to transportation on our bus lines, and we're looking also now at where we have event coverage for public safety and some predictive analysis based on cell phone use and folks who have registered to go to an event. As we see building off that, if there are more in that locale, we know that police presence is being increased at the event where it's not what was expected originally. So that's, you know, again, a lot of it is about the data gathering, and obviously the security around it is still to be determined because you have so much data from so many varied sources and very little. I know that the Cyber Improvement Act of 17 is sort of aimed at the devices and the manufacture and the sale of devices, but it still leaves a lot to be desired, and the funding behind administering to it, whether it's at the state level, the federal level, or the local level, is just, you know, it's insane. I guess it's mind-boggling. Yeah, thank you.
Mind-boggling.
So just to pick up on both of what has been said so far, Virginia is obviously, are one of the 6 FAA test sites for unmanned systems. So the fact that we're looking at drones and applications as to how they can be used, and it does all come back to data at some point. How it's collected, who has access to it, how is it secured, how long do you keep it, whether it's a license plate reader or whether it's a drone, you've still got a common factor, and that's all data. So we are looking at the sensors in the roadbed, we're looking at drones, but we've taken a little bit of a different tactic in trying to look at how do we help our communities be smart about adopting IoT policies and adopting IoT devices and building on what we've done at the state level. So we actually formed a working group around smart communities. We pulled together a wide swath of folks from many, many disciplines, and we partnered up with NIST, the framework that they've done around smart communities. They have 6 or 7 super clusters that we're following the lead on, and so we're taking what NIST has done and trying to bring it down a level to the state level and make it relevant to what's going on in our communities, where they want to be going, where they see themselves going. Some of them, they have, with all due respect, they don't have a charted future into IoT. It's kind of happening to them rather than them taking an active role in that process. So we really have stepped out and tried to put a framework and put a wrapper around it to make it less risky and to allow them to be better consumers when it comes to IoT devices.
That's great.
So it's going to be interesting. So Bill Gates, he didn't announce, but I think they kind of leaked it, that he's investing about $80 million in a new community in Arizona, Belmont. I'm not sure if you're aware of Belmont.
Oh, yes.
Yes. So, you know, the objective is to do a smart city and to kind of, I won't say build it from start, but really to kind of get in there. And so it'll be interesting to see what they learn when you're not having to kind of, you know, deal with legacy systems that are in place. That said, for the states, you know, let me turn to one positive thing and again, another cautionary tale. Maryland has launched this thing called MD Think. And what it is a $195 million initiative where they're looking to improve the input of eligibility data and casework information. And so they're going to be doing that mobile. And so they're, you know, again, it's kind of like an IoT, a smart thing, just to add some, you know, optimal, some efficiency into what they're doing. And the good thing is that they're already beginning to look at the security ramifications of what they're doing, and which is good because they're on the front end. But on the other side, kind of a cautionary tale is when you begin to look at this whole movement of the cloud and the expansion of Wi-Fi and broadband, it presents some pretty unique challenges. And to wit, let me give you an example. So our last year, our Internet Security Threat Report, what we call the ISTR, we polled CIOs during 2016 and said, hey, how many cloud apps do you have running in your environment? And the answers we got back were around 30 or 40, something like that. When we do what's called a shadow cloud assessment, where we pop a box on and we sniff out what's going on in their systems, we find close to 1,000, a little less than 1,000. So that tells you that, you know, everywhere you have broadband leaking out, anywhere you have got routers that are unsecured and the people plugging in, they're going to put things on. And there's a place in my hometown where I live where you can actually suck off the county's Wi-Fi, and it's, you know, it's about 600 yards away, and it's not, doesn't seem very well protected. I won't say, you know, I wouldn't say. So I think there's some advantages, or there's some good examples, but I think again there's some cautionary tales that we need to be aware of.
Okay, great. So what would you say when you're implementing all of these different technologies and trying to connect all of these different autonomous systems? what are your top security concerns that you're looking at with this?
I think that it goes back to the approach of the multiple devices, multiple device types, multiple operating systems, and the direction, if you will, that's coming from multi-directional. It's coming from all different. So it's very difficult to say. In essence, you're putting a very, I say, general policy around it. There has to be a lot of, and going back to our talk about the data, there has to be a lot of data science around it to determine what's coming in, where it's coming from. How do you determine if it's safe? It's not something that you've got, 100,000 new endpoints out there, so to speak. And, the data's coming from everywhere. There's those that you've established, like we talked about before, in street sensors or light sensors, traffic controls and whatnot. But the things that, again, what we're doing in sort of the crowdsourcing, for lack of a better term, you've got it coming from multiple devices. So you really have to, you're putting an umbrella on it, if you will, but you really have to spend a lot of time determining how do you analyze that data, the data analytics that have to go around it, and creating a policy around it is even to the point of isolating the data that you're gathering from those sources from other systems. I mean, that's where we're looking now to say it's one of our cloud. We haven't really gone down the road, but it's our planned cloud pilot is to have it separate from our systems to gather this data, because we don't know exactly what's in it and what's going on with it, so to speak. And that's, it almost, it makes you almost feel naive, but that's what it comes down to.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
And this is Bob with Maricopa. We like to look at the problem from two perspectives. One is the device, or the devices themselves. The other is the data or the information. So from a risk perspective, what risks do these devices impose or introduce to our network, our other devices? And from a data perspective, what is the sensitivity of the information? What's our responsibility to protect it, to make sure that the right people see it and only the right people see it?
Just to follow up on a little bit of both of those, I think a big challenge that we have, especially, and these two gentlemen obviously have strong IT staffs. They're resourced to be a good steward for their communities of the IT infrastructure and the community data. I think in a lot of the rural areas, we don't see a large band of IT staffs in every community. And so part of the worry is you have vendors that are coming in that are selling services and that's predominantly why we started doing the work that we've done to try to help them, is that they have just a lot of opportunities being thrown at them. There's not a lot of risk capital that they have to be able to spend on these activities. And so they're being asked questions about who's going to have possession of their data. And a lot of times their IT staff it's comprised of people that come in and do it as a volunteer, people that come in and do it after school, or a college kid that comes home on break. And when you start to think about if we share a common vendor, whether it's a state or a local, or we both connect to each other, if they get into you, they get into me. And so the interconnectedness of all of this, whether we do the best job that we can, any of us do, when you start to realize that it's not just you have to worry about, it's who else you're connected to and who they're connected to, and it starts to be this very wild web and daisy chain of vulnerability points that unless you really are thinking about the totality of the system, the electric grid is in the middle of all of this. All of these devices have to be plugged in at some point. And so there are major systems that are being put potentially at risk that we all have to think about in a much different way than just securing ourselves. We've seen, some of the major attacks come through HVAC systems and things that weren't your typical ones and zero type vectors. And so now we have to start thinking about that. We actually, during last year's legislative session, there was a bill put forth to establish minimum security standards for hard devices, we already have them on the information technology side of the house, but it was more about the hard devices, traffic lights, anything that would have a networking component, whether it was connected to the web or not. I will tell you that bill came back at us as quickly as we put it in, because the manufacturers didn't want to take on the added cost, the added responsibility. And so I think we've got a long conversation and probably some heated conversations yet to have around not just security of the devices, but how we are all going to secure with each other to make sure that we are doing the diligence we need to protect ourselves and our citizens.
So in similar fashion, we have the same, as I said, the shared services efforts that we do in Westchester. We provide devices and manage devices for some of the municipalities. We're the ISP for some of the municipalities. We have some application support for them. Ultimately, we're looking at, as with continuity and disaster recovery, the whole idea to be collaborative and Bob and I were talking briefly before, but we're educating within and doing the awareness, but we have the same, we're very diverse in terms of some very urban areas and very rural areas within the county, and doing the same type of thing to reach out for the rural areas to, and not even necessarily, even some of the smaller towns and villages to say, you know, we can help you with this, and we'd love to have, from our perspective, from the county's perspective, a top-down approach that's collaborative, not imposing anything, but collaboratively defining what the definition should be and what the action should be, an incident response and what have you, so that it's not just at the county level, but everybody within is doing sort of as close to the same thing as you can get.
So to piggyback on Karen and then to answer your question, so you know, we are seeing some movement both at the federal level and in certain states, not just Virginia, about trying to shore up, you know, what the IOT security should look like. So there's the federal act moving through. California tried to push through the teddy bears and toasters legislation, which was designed to kind of promote. It was a little broad, and I think, you know, similar to what took place in New York, the manufacturing community got up and killed it. But I don't think it's going to go away, the regulation side of things. So to answer your question around kind of, you know, what are some of the good attributes, one is I think there's a role for the NIST framework in all of this, and in terms of applying, looking at how you can govern these very massive systems. And again, you know, one of the concerns, though, again, with NIST is that it doesn't just become a check the box, that it really becomes an exercise in assessing your risk and kind of helping you advance what it is that you need to do. And there are things, you know, for example, we've got some processes where it kind of helps you do that automatically, helps do some governance. And so these systems are going to get so big and so complicated that it's not going to be a person's job to do it. It'll be a person's job to monitor it. And so the question then is, you know, how you begin to align your overarching technology that's going to govern it and govern your paper policies, but they're not going to be able to do it just because it's just too unwieldy. The other thing is that when you begin to look at kind of all the different, when IoT and smart cities, and Karen's talking about the big attack against not a manufacturer, a realtor, Target. Retailer, sorry. They jumped from the AC condition, the air conditioning unit. And so when you begin to look at the points of ingress and egress into systems and the potential loss of data, you know, I think the notion is for all you practitioners on the line out there is that you have to begin to think about how you encrypt your data so if it does leave your network, if it is being sucked off in the cloud, that the person, you know, if they're not authorized to use it and to use it in that environment, that they can't do that. And so there are processes in place, there are tools in place that allow you to do that, encrypt it with the cloud using multi-factor, and there are many, many kind of examples of where that's gone wrong. And I think with IoT and smart cities, you get some gain, but you also have some risks.
And to pick up again on two themes there, starting with we have to be careful about understanding how we share with each other. There are a number of sort of big, if we step back for a moment, big picture initiatives, maybe call them balloons, that overlap, that affect each other. So we have the introduction of ubiquitous sensors, IoT. We have the movement of the employee workforce to be more mobile. What implications does that have to the perimeter of your network and data flow? We have the movement on the back end from hosted data centers to cloud. How do those all interact with each other? We used to talk about security domains, to your point, about if information is coming from different areas. But I think that's moving towards a new terminology, which is more trust, digital trust, and really digital identity. So how do we think about what humans traditionally are used to with how do we develop trust over a long period of time to how do we move to with all these large number of devices that need to establish relationships quickly and maybe change. How do we have a system by which we can establish trust and identity quickly and change as needed?
Great, okay. So building off of the developing trust, all of this smart city technology is to better the different things for the public, right, for the citizens, whether there's transportation, communication, energy, supplies, and things like that. But we also know that there are a lot of concerns out there from the people, the privacy concerns and things like that. So what kinds of concerns are you seeing from the public? How are you moving forward in educating or trying to work with them when it comes to these concerns?
So I think from our perspective, it really, in a sense for us, we see that it's been, at least from the standpoint of public information, public data that we're gathering, we're doing more educating. It's not, and I'm not saying that there aren't concerns expressed, what are you doing with my data? Of course, there's a large public awareness from any of the vulnerabilities that have been exposed or the threats that have been exposed. But I think there's more push from us to educate about cybersecurity and even the at-home thing, regardless of your interaction with the county itself. We're doing a push to bring awareness to it, and I actually think that's more prevalent than the public coming to us and asking. We have a responsibility to make sure that we protect them and protect their data, regardless of whether it was whether we gathered it the old, quote unquote, the old way, or whether it's something that's coming to us via an IOT device, and then it happens to be someone who's registered and they're getting on one of our buses, and we know what routes they're taking, and we're trying to collaborate with other departments, so we know that a veteran is getting on a bus and taking a bus and is also serving. So it goes to the the big data thing also, if you will, or data analytics. But the whole thing is now, again, I keep going back to it, but the various sources. And again, what we're doing is where we're providing applications or where we're providing services that the public can manage themselves, we try to bring awareness regardless whether it's on a website or whether it's on one of our apps.
That's great. I'm going to jump.
I'm sorry.
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
I think part of it is perspective, too. There's a coolness factor with so many of these things that a lot of people are jumping in and just going full bore into the newest and greatest thing. Millennials, they're digital natives. They view this whole landscape very differently than any of us sitting up here, and probably most of you in this room. It's just a different perspective. So when you start to think about, as long as there's utilitarian value for a citizen or a child and you can prove that there's a betterment, generally you don't get as many privacy questions. But then you turn around and you look at a license plate reader, which has very, very definite and clear benefits for public safety. Then you start to get into the debates about, is a license plate a public entity? Do you own it? Do you rent it? If those documents are if the data is available to public safety, then could potentially a divorce attorney whose client significant other happens to be doing something they shouldn't, you could use a license plate readers to find out where they were. And so you start to get into this very weird conversation. And so we've really found that I think we do very generalized education around trying to be cyber safe. We have a lot of people that write in and ask for, how do you report something or how do you do this? And so we do a lot of education on that. But I think it all boils down to the citizen's perspective. We joke around about the collection of GIS data. Somebody was talking about that earlier. There's a company that drives through your neighborhood that produces maps. People go outside, they wave, they smile, they want to take a selfie with the car. If that were a government vehicle driving down the road doing the same thing, we would be fired upon. We would be, So a lot of it is in perspective and how the individual views their interaction with what you're trying to do. If it saves them traffic time, then they're all for it. They don't even think about the data that's behind it and the fact that the data is being collected. Online shopping, same thing. But when there comes a pinch point is usually when you start to see that there's a big difference. And so you get to educate a lot and do what you can to try to generally make people safer online. But I think their opinion of whether or not they're going to raise up and have questions about why you're doing it or how you're doing it all depends on perspective.
And from Maricopa County, we have not yet seen an outcry or a large number of questions come in about what information we're collecting or how we're using it. So we are trying to be proactive, get ahead of the curve, put ourselves in the place of a local resident. I happen to be one. If I were a private citizen, how would I want my information protected, held? We are fortunate in that we have some infrastructure in place already. We have a Chief Privacy Officer. Hello, Marion Gardner out there in Webland. Thank you for your service. We started our privacy team a number of years ago to address healthcare HIPAA regulations. So we are now building on that base to try to understand and extend the definition of sensitive information and privacy. How do we extend that? How do we understand that in other contexts, especially as we're collecting more information with these devices, the Internet of Things?
So you had talked, you kind of did two tracks. You talked about this notion of building trust, and then you also talked a little bit about identity, and I want to hit on the latter. So when you begin to think about all the business that you're doing now with the Internet, with government, with social media, you know, if I could prognosticate, I would say that I think identity and the role of government in identity, online identity, is going to continue to grow. Whether that's, you know, having your citizens have to put in information, you know, like a multi-factor, like Symantec has a VIP access tool, where you can, you know, if you want to get a hunting license, you have to have some two-factor thing in place. Whether it's social media, you know, you can post if you're a known entity or not post, or some kind of, you know, checkbox. That I think that's going to continue to be an area of tremendous growth. And begin to think about the privacy implications of some of this stuff. You know, you know, one of the great benefits of the web used to be the fact that you could be anonymous out there. I mean, it wasn't always a good thing. Obviously, it brought up some bad things, but it allowed people to, you know, look up things like maybe they would feel embarrassed to ask about a health condition. They could look it up and research it on their own without having to ask those embarrassing questions. And I think, you know, the privacy issues are going to continue to plague the IOT and the smart city. You talk about the vet. It almost sounds like you're talking about tracking the vet as he gets on a bus or moves through a city. And you know, there's a little joke on the radio this weekend, real story, that a guy who works for I think a waste management company was playing hooky from work and took his phone, which they tracked him on, and he stuck it in his homemade Faraday bag out of potato chips. That didn't work. But you know, so when you begin to think about that, you know, where do the privacy limitations stop? And you know, we talk about a defense in depth strategy, and I think that paradigm at some point may even get, because it's everywhere. It's not just depth; it's here. It's not, you know, the whole notion of perimeter has gone away, where it's so integral to everything that we're doing. And so, you know, one thing that people on the line should be aware of is that in Europe there's something called the GDPR, which is taking place, which will have worldwide implications for privacy.
And if I can riff off of a point you were making about identity, and really talk about two aspects. One is human identity, and the other is non-human identity. So the first one about people or person identity, from how can we think about that in a way that makes people's lives easier. So one particular implementation for the county, for instance, is right now, if you want to conduct business online with the county, you will probably have to go to 3 or 4 different areas, and you provide your personal information. You make tax payments, for instance. You register with the election officials. Wouldn't it be better, from my perspective as a citizen, if I have one identity, I enter the information once, and whatever service I want with the entity, with the county, it remembers that information, but it does so securely. So I am confident in that my private information will be used to make my life better, to enhance my transactions, but it stops there. The information is not going to leak out. And from a political perspective, we have different parts of the county with separate authorities, elected officials. That's, from an internal perspective, that's why we have the disjoint identity perspective. Why don't we take a customer or a resident perspective and fix that? Moving on to non-person identity, again, I think especially with IoT, we're really going to have devices, applications, other processes that will have identities, and we need trust, and we have to determine how we're going to create and manage those.
Fantastic. So building off of the first point that you just made there, one of the questions that I have here are, how are state and local governments utilizing the data of the IoT devices and smart technologies, what's being produced,
conference is scheduled to be disconnected automatically in 5
And so I think what you're saying right there is bringing that all
Enter
together.
Enter *1 to cancel and continue the conference.
One instead of multiple, right, kind of areas.
Party conference alert has been reset.
I think to Bob's point, just in general, that the direction we'd like to go, Karen mentioned the silos, and I think anybody who's been in, IT for a very long time, in government especially, there was public safety data separate from and even within the public safety spectrum, whether it's corrections or probation or police or emergency services, even within there, public safety data separate from health and human services data, potentially separate from other financial data or maybe, parks and recreation data type thing. I think the idea really is it makes it a better experience for the citizen and for the public and for the businesses that deal with the county to have a single repository of master data, if you will. And I think it does assist in building around that and creating protocols. The application, you have standard application development, security methodologies, standard for the data itself, centralized, if you will, but as best you can centralized, but secure access to data allows you to administer and manage it better. And I think that point is well taken, that's the best way that from the cyber perspective to approach it.
So we've taken a little bit of a different approach. When we came into office, we started asking questions about data. Where is it? Who has access to it? How is it secured? And there had never been a complete data inventory ever done. So a few people knew about a few things over here, the health people knew about theirs, the public safety, but we had never done a top-to-bottom inventory of the data. And we did it based on trying to identify personally identifiable information and to do a better job of securing it. And so it took executive order for us to be able to do that. In case, if any of you haven't ventured down this path far enough yet, you will figure out that data equals turf equals power.
Absolutely.
That's just an equation you need to write down somewhere.
Absolutely.
And so we really spent almost a year just going through the agency, coffers of the data. And then we were able to do a risk-based rack and stack of who had the most risky, the most personally identifiable information, and then on down the line. And from that, we were actually able to put together a shared services model for our own agencies because we were able to identify that certain agencies definitely needed a CISO and a CIO all the time, 24/7, end of story. Others, maybe not so much, but they still needed help. And so we went through and we were able to come up with a shared services model for our own internal use, and we've been running that now for about a year. It's been helpful, and I think a lot of the agencies have breathed a little bit of a sigh of relief in that now the responsibilities, some of those responsibilities were somebody that was just appointed to be the CISO, and that was kind of its other duties as assigned. And so I think you start to uncover pieces and parts where you can really affect the security of a lot of these data and data chains throughout government, but you've got to know what you've got and where you're starting from in order to be able to make any kind of sizable achievements or differences in the way they get handled.
That's great. I think the agencies, in a lot of ways, and again, so for our standpoint, we're very centralized. We don't have the silo, the various IT or, departments or divisions. It's all governed centrally, which is great. But I think they welcome, the structure and the definition. It's like that you still have the fiefdoms of protecting their own data, but I think they, ultimately, agencies welcome the ability that someone has defined for them, this is what is, and this is how it goes, and this is how it doesn't go.
Absolutely.
So what's going to be interesting is to see how the MSI-SAC's role, industry's role, larger governments, in particular in states, their role and how they interface with and how they support smaller governments. So take, for example, Karen had talked about some of these rural areas that may not have a full-time CIO or a full-time CISO, but now they're moving towards smart technology. And so, how you have an MSI-SAC, which provides some managed security services, how do you begin to carve out what like a GSA doesn't have the ability to kind of manage on their own? So for us, we work very closely we work very closely with a number of different organizations to kind of carve that off. And I think IOT is only going to, and the whole smart city stuff is only going to continue to grow that, because there just won't be the capabilities out there. And one of the, in either big government or even small government as things begin to ramp up. And so what will be interesting for the folks on the phone in their role as security professionals is I can sum it up as, so if you've seen the movie The Founder, it's about Ray Kroc, and you're like, what the hell does Ray Kroc have to do with cybersecurity? So he's in the bank, and he's franchising all the McDonald's, and he's going broke, and he's saying to the bank, I can't believe I've got 100 franchises, I'm going broke. And there's another guy who becomes a business partner, overhears the conversation, pulls him out and says, you don't even know what business you're in. You don't need to be in the fry and the shake business. You need to be in the real estate business. And that's how he made his money. He became a real estate magnate. And so I looked at that as a lesson for what we're doing in cybersecurity. And you begin to layer on IoT, you begin to layer on smart cities, you begin to layer on what business are you in the States in? Are you in the cybersecurity business? Are you trying to provide it, or are you trying to manage it? And it becomes a little bit of a nuanced discussion, but it's something I think you need to begin to think about. What kind of, and it dovetails nicely with the workforce discussion, what type of people and players do you need? How do I purchase service? How do I manage this thing? How do I leverage what the feds have, MSI-SAC has, the private industry has?
Fantastic. Did you want to add something? Okay. So that's great. We've all talked a little bit about partnerships, right? You're working with NIST on a couple of things, and the working group that you have in the state. I know that you guys have different working groups going on with your counties and at different state, local levels. Where do you see that going? Where do you see that moving forward with the public-private partnerships, as well as from the federal level down? I know that's pretty broad, but
as I said this morning, it's essential for, I think, all of us. It needs to be a collaborative discussion. Then there should be a well-defined platform, if you will, at the federal level down. But then I think within, for us, we are very limited in resources, and again, I know everybody's limited in resources. I think I've been saying more and more it seems like every year, but I really do believe we've heard it all our lives, but we're doing more with less. We're really doing more with less these days. So, but I think it does go to collaborative efforts with public-private. It's bringing, even locally, bringing business in to discuss what they're doing and discuss what we can be doing together. It goes to the partnerships like with Symantec and other providers to give us the resources, whether it's informational, whether it's advisory, or sometimes it's the boots on the ground to get something rolled out and discuss the efforts that need to be made, because again, we're very limited in our resources. I have a group called the Advanced Technology Group. It's two folks. I tell them, you're sort of my Google as best as you can get at the county level. You get the opportunity to just spend some time looking at what's out there and bring it back. And I welcome that, and I think we all probably welcome that for all of our employees and staff. But it has to be, and it's simply said, we say it all the time, but it is about communication. But I think it's communication. It's up and down, if you will, at the government level, from the the small village to the town, to the city, to the county, to the state, to the feds. and then it's to the public sector, to the private sector with those partners that can help us do what needs to be done.
And I think that needs to be approached from a number of perspectives. One is with purchasing. We are working with Symantec as an example they might be here today, to develop partnerships between the various entities in the region. So the city, the state, the county, and smaller counties. How can we standardize, how can we create contracts that allow for better pricing and at the same time create best practice standards? So again, the smaller groups who don't have the people or resources to research these things can default to, oh, this is a good thing to do, and oh, now I can afford it. Let's put that into place.
So I'm glad you said that, because when we first started with our managed services agreement and procurement with Symantec, which I think was in 2013, we actually wrote into our agreement that any municipality within the county could also avail themselves of product or services at the same prices as the county. And Symantec actually, at the time, I should have mentioned this a long time ago, but went a step beyond in providing, obviously it was part of the bigger picture, but providing for some of those small municipalities, providing really at no cost to them, the desktop endpoint protection, really. So that went back to 13, but the idea is that collaboration they do.
I think another aspect of that beyond just purchasing is really services, outsourcing services. So again, how can we do a better job with taking off our plate what we don't need to focus on, right. Share with other folks who are focused on that. So it's the 80-20 rule. So we can now focus on the 20% that's the secret sauce that makes us different, special, the reason we're here, the services we provide.
So in terms of partnership, and I'll talk a little bit about the private sector and then the role of the Fed. So you take a company like Symantec, and I know that you may think this is just kind of propaganda, but I think we really see ourselves as a mission-driven company. I'm a believer. My whole focus, my whole raison d'etre has always been Homeland Security and public safety, one form or another, since I've started. And what was interesting is yesterday we had a group of Canadian government officials visit our SOC in Herndon, and to hear them talk about, they call our people who work on the keyboards, they call them cyber warriors, and they mean it, because they're fighting for their people because they're out there doing it. So you take Symantec, we have about 13,500 people in about 160 countries worldwide. We have about 3,500 full-time staff doing nothing but intelligence and analysis worldwide, and that gets pushed into all our systems in almost real time. You can't compete with that. No government, I mean, we have the largest privately held intelligence arm out there. And so folks have to partner with us, and we want to partner with because it's what we're in business to do. And it's the mission. So if you get hit, call us. Even if you're not a customer of ours, call us. We can help you. But the whole notion of partnerships is only going to continue to grow. And there may be some, what's interesting, I was just thinking about when you were talking about, partnerships with, so Google. If you Google at work, look up something, you're partnering with Google in some respects, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you may not think about it. It may not be a good thing that you're doing that, but that's all right. And they're tracking you. But, that whole notion of partnership with the private sector and, not just being a vendor, but being a partner kind of in there is only going to continue to grow.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead. Okay. So we have about 10 minutes left. We are going to enter into the question and answer period now. Unfortunately, we can't open the phone lines up to our webinar participants, so I am relying on our audience here for a couple of good questions for our panelists. Anyone want to start this off?
Good afternoon. My name is Jason Christ. Thank you very much for your time and being here today. I think that the experiences that you provide for our citizens are under hot demand because citizens have so many different offerings from private sector organizations. So you guys are under the gun to provide different services for your citizens that may be far and beyond what you currently are providing today. So how do you sort of balance out the different service requests that you want to provide for your citizens and making sure it's providing value back to them, and then obviously weaving into the security element of that as well.
Sorry.
Well, if I may begin, this is Bob from Maricopa. Again, I think I've touched on this point before. We really try to keep in mind why we're here. What is our mission? Providing an environment that's safe and healthy for our customers. How do we need to constantly reevaluate what we do, how we do it, with that in mind. And in the interest of doing things, as you mentioned before, with fewer resources, and in the interest of transparency, which is a large initiative at the county now, how can we, again, reevaluate the tools, the processes, do away with things in order to introduce new things without increasing cost, and how can we be more effective using automation?
I think.
Oh, go ahead.
I think part of it too is looking. It has to be an ROI kind of decision. At some point, you obviously factor in what the citizen engagement, and we have agencies that will do customer roundtables. They really do try to get the consumer input, in our case it's the citizens, or it's the municipalities, to try to get their input. But at the end of the day, we've heard 1,000 times up here, we've all said it, we're constrained in resources. So is there a good, clear path for us, and it doesn't even have to be a clear path, but is there a path for us to be able to provide a certain service that is beneficial to the citizens that also we can reap some kind of benefit from? Does it cut down the length of time that you stand in a DMV? Does it, provide that we can have a few less staffers that are constantly on the line and we can redetail them to some other function that currently is a bottleneck somewhere else? So it's a balancing act, and if you think that trying to serve citizens is difficult, try serving the millennials that want to come work in government. When you say, sure, you can have an iPhone, whatever, or a, Samsung, and they look at you like you have horns and a tail because you're not handing them the latest version of whatever and saying that they have, they can get the latest toy every time a new one comes out. So it's a balance of not only just the citizen expectations, but it's also employee expectations. And you have to balance it all out and just try to do the best you can to create an environment that's creative and collaborative. And just going back to the collaborative piece for a second, we've all got to get beyond our silos. Whether it's information sharing from the feds to the states to the locals, or it's corporate, we are fighting a completely different situation now. In fact, I was in front of the legislature yesterday talking about cybersecurity and the electric grid. Going back to 2014, one of the nation states had about 100,000 cyber espionage folks working on a daily basis. That's more people than Virginia has employed in the cyber sector in a year. So they're at about 100,000. We got about 76,000. So when you start to talk about creativity and collaboration and new apps and things, we've all got to find ways to take advantage of information, to take advantage of things, but to do it in a smart way so that we're not all buying the same thing 100 different times. We need to find a good way to be able to partner up on those things.
So I think just quickly going to the question, it really is, it comes down to an ROI, whether it's an internal cost benefit or we talk about ROI for citizens and business in Westchester all the time. And it's about actually looking and, again, going to my advanced technologies team, looking at it and saying, you can play some, but you got to come back with something, before we're really going to put anything into this, money into it. We may do a proof of concept or pilot, but before we're going to put real money into this, what is it bringing to the citizens? How many citizens are going to take advantage of it? And really doing the balancing, if you will, of that versus cost and versus the administration of it. A lot of nice, good things. We have, a certain app, our bus, just using Google for our bus lines and knowing where the bus is and if it's on time. Very little effort on our part developing the app, just to lead into it, but it's really Google, right? So, and looking at that, if we developed it, it wouldn't have been worth it for us to develop it on our own, probably, but because there are a lot of tools out there. But it goes back to that.
Great. Do we have another question? Thank you.
Hey guys, this is Matt Leonard with Government Computer News. I'd like to hear from John and Robert maybe about a couple specific projects that you guys have going on in the IoT and smart city space. And you were talking about ROI, so just talk a little bit about why you decided to do those projects right now and the ROI you expect to get from those projects.
So for us, it's we're really tip of the iceberg. As I said, we're looking more at the gathering of data than the deploying of IoT, so to speak, at this point. But looking at those types of things, where we're looking at the bus thing, and now just again tip of the iceberg. So we're not deep in. We're really in more or less proof of concept, but tracking the user, the rider, and where the rider is getting on, getting off, the time and whatnot, and if they're using multiple routes, just and again, then it goes to our public transportation folks, but the evaluation of that data and the analytics to say, should we be changing routes? So that, the routes being underutilized. We eliminated routes, and if there's a public outcry and all determination that route really wasn't worthwhile to keep because of the number of people. So that's one of the things we're looking at now that's really at just proof of concept. So for us, a lot of it is data that's being fed to us. If you look at it from our sewer and our wastewater processing or our water departments and whatnot, the devices are out there. You're putting in more equipment that provides data. But it's not a deployment of such on our part.
And again, I would echo some of those comments, which is we are piloting. We're trying to understand what are some initial use cases and how do we wrap our head around the capabilities and the problems. So some of the primary ones, again, are for traffic control and congestion. How do we use sensors to understand where the traffic is, and can we incorporate that with smart traffic lights to adjust traffic flow? From a lower cost energy conservation perspective, can we do something with smart street lights to understand, is anybody in the area, people, vehicles? Can we dim the lights when people are not around and then bring them up again? From a safety perspective, flood control, again, getting back with drones. Where's the water? In Arizona, as you may know, it's a desert. You wouldn't think water would be a problem, but when it rains, a large quantity of water moves very quickly, and it can be dangerous.
We're also and again, this is just at a study stage in our health department, looking at remote medicine, for administration, and how would we deploy that. But again, it's just, initial phases. So that's, again, I have a mantra, if you will, that when I was hired on in Westchester, the boss liked it, and he's used it a couple of times, but it's essentially no technology for technology's sake, right? And my staff's gotten tired of hearing it, but it's really, we're not doing this just to do it, because we're not going to, quote unquote, do IoT. So that evolved into cloud, no cloud for cloud's sake. So we maybe, somebody might look at it and say, well, somebody your size, why haven't you? But we went through our entire, server inventory and restructuring and whatnot, and then consolidation and virtualization, knowing that it would take us there. But we didn't jump into the cloud. We know that that's where we're going. We know. So I've gone, and it's sort of the same thing, no IoT for IoT's sake. We're going to do this, but we're going to do it methodically and planned out, and know that there really is a return on investment for it.
Okay, fantastic. I think we have a minute left, so I think you were going to ask one question.
Yep, we received this from one of our remote participants. The 2018 Super Bowl will be hosted in Minneapolis, a city that has never hosted this event before. What is the strategy for assessing potential threats and vulnerabilities in a scenario with so many unknowns?
That's a big question for one minute.
I was going to say, with 53 seconds left on the clock, it's going to require table topping. It's going to require a public safety type approach to securing the city. I should have let Thomas probably have this from his public safety background, but this is something that needs to be exercised. You have to get all the people around the table early You have to assess the situation as you would any kind of other large public safety issue, even a hurricane. You plan for those, and then at the end of the day, you also plan for what happens if something goes wrong.
And I can tell you that that is happening with the Super Bowl efforts now. Lots of different public-private partnerships there.
Absolutely.
Lots of exercises already, lots of meetings already happening for that. So with that, thank you very much for all of those participants out there across the U.S., 500 of you. I really appreciate you joining us here today. Thank you to our in-person audience. Glad you could be here. Sorry we didn't get some more questions. I'm sure you all had waiting. You can talk offline after this. And thank you so much to our esteemed panel. This was really informative. This is a great topic. It's one that's certainly evolving, and we all have our work cut out for us. And I appreciate the work that you do, as well as all of those people behind the scenes that are doing the work with us. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Portia.
Thanks.
Thank you.